Hello. So before we did, the previous topic was plants, systems of transport in plants, xylem and phloem. What we're doing this time is what happens in us and other animals. So you'll be a wee bit more familiar with this, I would think. So we're going to start off by looking at the role of blood. Blood, of course, is what's going to transfer materials around and has some other roles as well. So describe the roles of red and white blood cells. And before we get into that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what happens if you might have blood might not function in the way that it should. And what we've got here is haemophilia, and all the ones this has been was known to be in the royal family, so a lot of Queen Victoria's descendants. And if you look at the ones highlighted in red, they all suffer from haemophilia, so it's a genetic disease. And if you look at the ages at which they died, you can see that it's pretty serious. 14-4, Prince Valdemar of Prussia was a bit older, 31 though, 21, so it's a serious illness. And what it means is the blood doesn't clot as it should, so it results in prolonged bleeding. And yeah, I didn't mention that, did I? But it's I think all of the descendants here are male. For example, our son, so he died of a brain hemorrhage after a fall. So if somebody, if someone without haemophilia had a fall, the chances are the blood would clot and you would bruise and you would recover. But something which would be relatively minor to other people for haemophiliacs can result in huge blood loss and ultimately death. So yeah, other descendants as well died prematurely after events such as falls, operations, and also car accidents. So life better now for haemophiliacs, but yeah, it's something they live with every day. So here is this is inside a blood vessel, and you've got the big red blood cells here, and you've also got these white ones as well. So human blood, just to give you the sort of basics, you've got 4.5 litres, and you don't need all of that. It will be made if you lose some. You'll produce more if you lose some, which is why we can donate blood. Some of the blood vessels are very small. A lot of them are very small, and there's 25,000 miles of them within your body. 1 teaspoon of blood contains 25 billion red cells. So here it is. Same picture again. So what do you think? We've got nutrients, but what else might be transported in our blood? Think about gases, for example. So the two main gases, oxygen, which is essential, and then also carbon dioxide, which is produced, remember from that process from Unit 1, process in which the kind of key thing is to produce ATP, but carbon dioxide is also produced as a waste product, respiration. So CO2 has to be, it goes into the blood when cells produce it as waste, and then we have to remove it, we breathe it out. Also within our blood we've got plasma, so if you're able to separate it, obviously the sort of red colour dominates our blood when you cut yourself, but 55% of it is plasma, so it carries various nutrients around the body. So I think you probably know this. So red blood cells, they're specialised to carry oxygen. And without me telling you, just by looking at the sort of shape of them, you might be able to come up with adaptations they have which makes them efficient at carrying oxygen around the body. So the first thing is they have this biconcave shape. I don't have my proper pen attached just now, but I'll try and draw a biconcave shape. You know how good my drawing is. Oh dear. So that's not great. But anyway, that is rubbish. I'm actually going to try again. That is slightly better, but it looks a bit like a bone, doesn't it? Anyway, you've got it curves in on each side. So that's the biconcave shape. And also they don't have nuclei. And as a result of these two factors, it means they've got a large. And also, in order for them to allow them to carry oxygen, You have a word here, a substance, which is a bit like haemophilia. They've got hemoglobin. So it's hemoglobin that binds to the oxygen. And what happens is when the oxygen concentration in the blood is high, so that is in your lungs, so depends if you might have looked at the absorption as well, so you know about alveoli. You may not have covered that yet, but remember blood goes past the alveoli and you've got oxygen going into it from the lungs. So this is what happens. So hemoglobin binds to oxygen and this produces oxyhemoglobin. Then what happens when the oxygen concentration in the blood is low, what will happen is oxyhemoglobin will deposit its oxygen and release it to these cells that are going to use it for respiration. Something worth just mentioning as well. So what you've got here is a tumour, and you've got normal cells and you have got cancer cells. So we talked about red blood cells, and they had their role in carrying oxygen, but you also have white blood cells. And something you may not know, that in the average human, you have 3 cells apparently which become cancerous every day. You have this tumour beginning to form, which is quite a scary thought. However, what generally happens is that the immune system is able to detect these kind of errors occurring and can kill the tumour before it forms. As you become older, the immune system doesn't function in the way it should. It's maybe not as efficient as when you're young, so that's why as you get older you've got an increased chance of getting cancer, but generally our immune system deals with it. So the immune system, what is it? So it's your white blood cells partly, so it's part of the immune system, and just be familiar with this term, pathogen. So pathogen is something which is essentially going to do you some damage which shouldn't be there. Bacteria, viruses, and so on. So the white blood cells are involved in destroying the pathogens. There's 2 types. The first one is phagocytes, and what they do is they engulf, what was that word again? The things which have come into your body which shouldn't be there, bacteria, viruses, pathogens. So they engulf the pathogens, then they digest them, and the process of that is called phagocytosis. Okay, so here's a wee, hopefully you can see this in the video, but there's meant to be a GIF here. So you've got something which looks like a little mouth, and it comes along, it's the phagocyte, and you've got the bacteria in green, and the phagocyte just engulfs it and digests it. So it just looks like it's eating it basically. But try and use, of course, you know, if you're to write an exam, the phagocyte eats the bacteria, then that wouldn't be acceptable. So yeah, engulf, digest, the process is called phagocytosis, would be more acceptable. And that's another image of it. Hopefully you can see that. So again, it's just the phagocyte on the left and the pathogen on the right. The second type of white blood cell is lymphocytes, and lymphocytes produce a protein which was mentioned in Unit 1. So the proteins that we talked about were enzymes, receptors, structural proteins. Here we're dealing with antibodies, and this is of course very topical because when you have your vaccine, then you should produce, what that does is stimulate your body to produce antibodies and to be ready for if you're infected with a virus. So lymphocytes produce specific antibodies, and again, hopefully you can see this image. So what they do is they bind to another type of proteins, that is receptors on pathogens, to destroy them. So if you can see this on the left, what you've got is the red thing is the pathogen, and you've got the receptors on it. The white Y-shaped antibodies come in and bind to the receptors. That then signals to the big white thing, which is the phagocyte, to come and digest it. So there's the phagocyte there. Red thing, pathogen, receptors on the outside, antibodies bind to it, and good night. Oh dear. So why do you have to get a JAG? There's the influenza virus vaccine, and there is what happens. But here's your virus, and on the outside you've got again these receptors that antibodies can bind to. So this is something that I made pre-COVID, and I went through I talked about what vaccines do and which vaccines you've had. So I think probably just because of current circumstances, you maybe have a bit more of the way that vaccines work. There's actually the one. I can't remember which one it is, if it's the AstraZeneca. I think it is the AstraZeneca. It's a new type of technology um, compared to probably most of the vaccines you've had, but it does the same thing. It primes the body's immune system so that you're better protected against viral infection. So this is something I would do in class, just to see how aware you are. So you've been vaccinated against 12 different diseases. In the olden days, a lot of people died quite young, and they suffered from various diseases which we have eradicated, polio and things like that, which is obviously a huge step forward for public health. So I'm wondering if you can write down as many as you can, and then once you've done that, I'll tell you what you've probably been vaccinated against, the standard ones in the UK. So here they are. So there's the ones at 2 to 4 months, including polio, whooping cough, diphtheria, and then at 1 year, the MMR, and you have various kind of boosters for that as you go through the first few years of your life. Then when you get to 12, girls only, they get this HPV virus. So this is something which, when I was at school, I don't think this didn't exist. So this is actually a virus, a human papilloma virus, which causes cancer. So you've now got a vaccine against that. And then 14 various meningitis viruses, 65, and then 70 shingles, which is chicken pox coming back, which is pretty nasty. Obviously, COVID isn't on here, but if you think the plan is that everybody over age 18, or if you've got underlying health conditions, will also get the COVID vaccine, and we'll have to wait and see how it develops as to whether I think the chances are, with various variants about, the chances are you might maybe boosters every year or so, in the same way that you would get a flu jag every year. So just to finish off, to see if you have got this in your head, press pause and do this. So just follow the instructions, and then once you're ready, press play and I'll tell you what you should have. So the first one, lymphocytes. So you could just flick back through the video or look at your notes for this, but what you should say is they produce antibodies which bind to receptors on pathogens, and this causes them to be inactivated or destroyed, I suppose you could say. And then for the drawing, you just the pathogens receptors is what you'd want to show. Could be a kind of Y shape, and then the antibodies as well might be a kind of Y shape binding to it, but just some sort of showing the interaction between the antibody and the pathogen in some way. Phagocyte, you might want to have drawn a little Pac-Man type thing showing it engulfing a pathogen. And then red blood cells, remember my beautiful drawing, something similar to that, probably not quite as good as mine, but anyway, biconcave shape, and the adaptations are, well, that's the first one, biconcave shape, no nucleus, which allows for a large surface area. You could also say that it it possesses hemoglobin, which binds to oxygen. Okay, to start off with, can you write down numbers 1 to 3 and write down the letters which go with each one? And there might be more than one which fits each one as well. So number 1, red blood cell. B, part of the circulatory system. C, biconcave shape. F, contains hemoglobin. G, lacks a nucleus. And then 2, phagocyte. A, part of the immune system. E, engulfs pathogens. And then lymphocyte. A, part of the immune system, and D, produces specific antibodies. And that's quite an important word there, specific, because the antibodies will be specific to whatever virus it is. So you're not going to have exactly the same response if you're infected with, say, rotavirus compared with influenza. It will work specifically to what you've been infected by. So the next part of this is looking at the structure of the heart and the pathway of oxygenated, so that's blood which contains oxygenated and which contains oxygen, and deoxygenated blood, that blood which doesn't contain oxygen, through the heart, lungs and body. Also within your heart you've got valves, so you need to be able to identify where they are and what they do. And finally, you've got coronary arteries there in your heart. So this is a wee bit of detail that quite often people forget in this topic. For some reason, I always miss this. So describe the function of coronary arteries as well. So circulatory system, you can see it here. It consists of the heart and the blood vessels. And just a wee point as well to make, that in textbooks you'll see that what they'll do is they'll colour deoxygenated blood blue. Your blood isn't actually blue. If it's got oxygen in it, it's going to be brighter red, and if it doesn't have oxygen, then it's going to be a sort of darker red. But it's just for ease of knowing, which blood vessels and which type of blood it is, that you'll see it as blue sometimes. And here you go. So you breathe in, so oxygen goes from your lungs into your bloodstream at the alveoli, then goes to the heart. The heart then pumps this oxygenated blood around the body. It gets used, the oxygen, for respiration, and then the blood, which no longer has oxygen in it, is returned to the heart, which then sends it back to the lungs to get oxygen again. And here is the heart. Isn't that a beautiful piece of engineering? So each day, 100,000 beats, and one beat at high pressure could make blood spurt 3 meters. 6,240 litres of blood travel through it per day, and it takes 50 seconds for the blood to complete a full circuit and get back to the heart. So when that blood leaves your heart, it goes all the way around, carries the oxygen to where it needs to go, deposits it, and then heads back to the heart. 50 seconds through your brain, through your liver, wherever it's going to go. So this is what it looks like, and the first thing to point out is that the left is on the right side, if you know what I mean. So you're imagining, as you're looking at your laptop or your tablet or your phone or whatever, you're imagining the heart is in somebody's chest who's facing you. So the left hand side is this side and the right hand side is the other side. And here are the blood vessels. So down the bottom we've got the ventricles, 2 ventricles on either side. And then at the top, the chambers are called the atria, is the plural, or atrium. And then we've got 4 blood vessels as well. So we've got the vena cava coming into the right hand side, pulmonary artery comes out the right hand side, and then pulmonary vein and the aorta on the left hand side. And the way I always teach it is, in terms of the blood vessels, arteries take blood away from the heart. So A for artery, A for away. So pulmonary artery takes it away, aorta takes it away. And you can see the thing I mentioned before here as well. So you've got the colour, the red on the left hand side is brighter than the red on the right hand side. So that indicates that this side of the heart is, you're dealing with oxygenated blood. And here is the route. Okay, so deoxygenated blood from the body comes into the right hand side. So this is your vena cava, then out from the pulmonary artery to the lungs, picks up oxygen, comes back in through the pulmonary vein here, and then out of the aorta to the body. And something else you'll see is there's more muscle on the left hand side here, and that is because this side of the heart has got to pump blood to down to the tips of your toes up to your brain, so it requires more muscle, whereas the heart is close to the lungs, so you can see this side it doesn't require as much, it's not as muscular because it's not going to carry the blood as far a distance. And there are 4 valves, and they are between the 2 chambers of the heart, and then also here between the ventricles and the pulmonary artery and the aorta. Okay, so these are the locations, and you can see them, they kind of look like little flaps. So this is something we do in class. I usually hand out the blue and the red pencils, and we just go through it to try and get this into our head. If you already think you know the order, you could just do this by yourself, and you could pause and do that, but I'll talk you through it. So we start off with the body tissues. So this could be your, could be anywhere, could be your liver, could be your kidneys. And what you've got is the oxygenated blood arriving. Then the cells within the tissue use the oxygen, so you're then left with blood which doesn't have oxygen in it. So that's why I've got red and blue for the body tissues. So this then goes back into the heart through the vena cava. Then right hand side of the heart, because it's deoxygenated blood. Then the right atrium. Then it's the right ventricle. Then do you know what's next? We're going away from the heart, we're going to the lungs, pulmonary artery. Pulmonary artery takes the deoxygenated blood to the lungs. Oxygen gets picked up, so we're now red. So we're in the alveoli now. Then back into the heart via the pulmonary vein. Left atrium, bottom of the heart. Up the left ventricle. Then out the big blood vessel at the top of the left hand side of the heart to the aorta, and it then takes that oxygenated blood around the body. Okay, so that's our direction of travel. Okay, so see if you can think of the answers as we do this. So the right side of the heart pumps something blood to the something, deoxygenated blood to the lungs. Okay, right hand side. And this is what happens at the lungs. So there's the deoxygenated blood arriving. We're not really talking about carbon dioxide here, but also you could say that it's going to go out into the lungs, and then oxygen gets picked up. Okay, there's just another wee drawing of it. So you've got deoxygenated blood picking up oxygen at the alveoli, and then there is the pulmonary vein that's going to take it back into the heart. And then once we get back into the heart, you're on the left hand side. So the left side of the heart pumps something blood to something. Here it is over here. Oxygenated blood to body tissues. And valves, I did mention them, I showed you where they are, but I didn't say what they do. So the valves in the heart and also in the veins up here, they prevent blood flowing backwards. So these just open and close with every beat, so the blood continues in that one direction. And that is when your heartbeat, this is what you're hearing, the valves opening and closing. So function of them, prevent blood flowing backwards. And yes, this is the thing that everyone always forgets. So we've talked about the blood going into and out of the heart, and we've talked about it supplying, your tissues around the body, your various organs, the muscles in your arms, the muscles in your legs. But don't forget as well, the heart, it's a muscle, and the heart requires oxygen. It needs to carry out respiration and get that, produce energy in order to pump blood itself, in order for the heart to contract. So this is what the role of the coronary arteries are. So the coronary arteries supply the heart muscle itself with blood. Okay, so the coronary arteries are within the heart. And this is, well, I was going to talk about heart attack, but I think that's my next slide. It is. So if these coronary arteries gets blocked due to fatty deposits or whatever else, then that part of the heart stops receiving oxygen, and that's what we call a heart attack. And that part of the heart will die as a result of that if it doesn't get oxygen for a period of time. If your arteries within your brain have a similar fate, then that's what you call a stroke, a brain attack, basically. same kind of idea as a heart attack, but it's just happened in your brain. And as a result of that, it can lead to loss of, paralysis and so on. So let's finish this section off. We're just going back through a bit of revision. So press pause, put down numbers, well, 1 to 7 to begin with, and then there's another one after this, and write down which blood vessel or part of the heart we're talking about here. So number 1 is the vena cava. Number 2 is the right atrium. Number 3 is the right ventricle, and then number 4, away from the heart, this is going to be pulmonary artery. So you're imagining now the blood has gone to the lungs, it's picked up oxygen, and now comes back into number 5, which is the pulmonary vein. Then 6, which is across from the right atrium, so that's the left atrium. 7, left ventricle, and then number 8, last one, is the aorta. Okay, so that's, maybe you can identify the location, but can you remember the order? So do 9 to 14 now, just to demonstrate to yourself that you know the route that the blood takes. Okay, we've done that. So number 9, we're going from the lungs back into the heart. This is oxygenated blood. 9 is the pulmonary vein. Then pulmonary vein takes it to the left atrium. Then left ventricle takes it to the aorta, and it takes it out the body to the body tissues. Oxygen then gets used, and the deoxygenated blood is returned to 12 vena cava, then 13 into the right atrium, then into the right ventricle, then from pulmonary artery back to the lungs to be oxygenated. So just the last section of this is to just have a bit more detail on the differences between arteries, veins and capillaries. So these are our blood vessels, so we're going to look at the structure and the function of them. So could you draw that table, please? And then we're going to try and fill it in. So press pause and draw that. So using that picture, see how much of the table you can fill in. So press pause and do that. And now I'd like you to watch the video, and while you're watching the video, continue to see if you can fill in the table. Okay, so here's the answers. So we've got kind of comparisons here. So for arteries, the walls of them are thicker and more muscular. So in comparison, for veins, they're thinner and less muscular. Then the channels for arteries, they are narrower, and for veins, they're wider, and the blood pressure then relates to the width of the channels. So if arteries have got narrower channels, then the blood pressure is higher, whereas in veins, they are going to be lower. Direction of blood, arteries, remember, away from the heart, and then veins towards the heart. And which one's got valves? Veins. V for valves, V for veins. And the third type of blood vessel is capillaries. So they are the smallest ones. You'll see them in your eyes, and they have very thin walls. Okay, so when you look at just how small some of these blood vessels are in the eye, you can then sort of imagine, why or how we can have 25,000 miles of them in our body. And there's a lovely drawing here, or a lovely image, not a drawing, this is not quite sure how this was taken, but what you've got here is your red blood cell within a capillary. So they carry the blood vessels in and out of tissues. So it's a bit like when we think about our bronchi becoming bronchioles and then the alveoli, it's the same sort of idea here. So your arteries and veins will get smaller and smaller, and they'll then have these capillaries which will just go in and out all the sort of nooks and crannies of the different organs and muscles to make sure blood can get in and out. And these sort of structures or features are as you might expect. So large surface area, so that you get efficient exchange, diffusion of substances moving in and out of them. And there's just a wee drawing. So there's the veins. The kind of specific term which you don't need to know is you've got arterioles and venules. So they're just the sort of capillary versions of the arteries and veins. Okay, let's try a question. So blood travels in 3 types of blood vessels. Compare the structure of 2 of these types of vessels. Okay, read the question carefully, press pause, and then write down your answers. Okay, so what you should have, first thing to say is just be careful. It says compare the structure. So if you say the function, if you say to carry blood away from the heart, they're not looking for that. It has to be something physical. So thickness of walls, if you said arteries have thicker walls than veins, that'd be a mark. If you said arteries were more muscular than veins, that'd be a mark. If you said veins have valves but arteries don't, that would be a mark. If you said arteries are narrow whereas veins are wide, that would be a mark. But just make sure it's that comparison. Don't just say arteries are wider. You know, just make sure you mention both blood vessels in your answer. Okay, next thing. This is kind of covers everything in this topic. So press pause and there's 10 mistakes. Write down the mistake and put in the correct word. Replacement. Okay, let's read through. In mammals, blood transports nutrients, oxygen, and carbon dioxide. Red blood cells have a large surface area, allowing them to transport oxygen efficiently in the form of oxyhemoglobin, and that's hemoglobin plus oxygen gives oxyhemoglobin. Red blood cells also carry waste water to the lungs. That should be carbon dioxide, or you could, I suppose, materials as well would be okay. There are 2 types of white blood cell, phagocytes and lymphocytes. Phagocytes engulf and digest chloroplasts. Nope, that should be pathogens. Whereas lymphocytes produce specific antibodies which bind to enzymes on a particular pathogen to destroy it. It's not enzymes they bind to, it's another type of protein. That should be receptor. Oxygenated blood from the lungs travels to the left side of the heart and exits via the pulmonary vein to supply the body's cells with oxygen. That should be aorta. Deoxygenated blood returns to the heart and is pumped via the vena cava to the lungs. That's not right. That should be pulmonary artery. Via the pulmonary artery to the lungs, where carbon dioxide diffuses out and oxygen diffuses in. Valves within the heart prevent blood from flowing backwards. The heart itself is supplied with oxygen and nutrients by the capillary artery. That's not right. That should be coronary artery. So we've had 1, 2, 3, 4, what's that, 6 so far. So that means there's 4 mistakes in the last paragraph. Arteries have thin muscular walls. No, that should be thick. Arteries have thick muscular walls and a wide central channel. That's wrong. That should be narrow. And carry blood under high pressure away from the heart. Veins have thicker walls, so you can see what's coming here, can't you? So that should be thinner, a wider channel, and carry blood under low pressure back towards the heart. Unlike arteries, they possess valves. Capillaries are thin-walled and have a large surface area, forming networks of tissues and organs to allow efficient exchange of materials. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's our 10. Okay, to finish off one of these, so these are all terms from the last, what have we got? This topic, animal transport, plant transport, and is there any from, I think that's it, yeah, from animal transport, plant transport. Oh no, there's some from the genetics bit as well. So see if you can work out the words and come up with a sentence for each one. Press pause and do that. Okay, number one, homozygous. So homozygous is a genotype in which both alleles are the same. So for example, big B, or small b, small p. Danny Tom is dominant, so you would be saying for this, a dominant allele is one which shows even if you only have one copy of it. 3, Inge Klopp, polygenic, so this is variation which is determined by more than one gene, or you could say one that shows a bell-shaped curve. Controlled by variation controlled by more than one gene. Atatoms is stomata, so stomata are where water vapor exits plants and their leaves. You could also have mentioned guard cells. Their opening and closing is controlled by guard cells. Tri-iron pants, transpiration. So that is the process by which water leaves the plant or is taken through the plant and leaves via the stomata. L-homp is phloem, so phloem carries sugar within plants. They're tubes which carry sugar. Cheap goatee is phagocyte. So phagocyte is a type of white blood cell which engulfs and digests pathogens. Leve Valve. So valves they prevent blood flowing backwards. They're found in veins and also in between chambers in the heart. Nave cave is vena cava, so that is the blood vessel which carries deoxygenated blood back into the right hand side of the heart. And finally, tri-ear is artery. So an artery is a blood vessel which carries blood away from the heart. It is thick and muscular, it carries blood at high pressure, and it doesn't have any valves.